have first a very short conversation about the costs of the lack of integration, and then we'll open the panel on the benefits of integration to the European Union with our colleagues and friends from the region. I will say only a few words to start with, and then ask the Commissioner to give us his views on the risks and the costs related to a lack of credibility or lack of progress on European integration of the region, but potentially also of other countries like Ukraine, but Georgia and Moldova too. I was just reflecting that probably I'm in the room one of the few that are coming from one of the founding member states of the European Union, I guess. And I was reflecting on the costs that would have had the lack of integration of the European Union in the very first place, some 70 years ago, in the world of today. Imagine the aggression of Russia against Ukraine today without the European Union in place. Imagine the impact that this would have had not only on Ukraine, with the lack of support and mobilization, but also on the rest of the continent. Imagine the divisions, imagine the fields that would be created, one against the other, and imagine the fragility of the continent. That would have been exactly the same fragility that we had repeated for thousands of years, where Europe was the epicenter of war rather than the epicenter of stability. And I was thinking that the same courage and the same long-term vision and determination that our founding fathers and mothers managed to find back then is probably what is required today. The cost of the lack of integration of the European Union back then would have been immense. I believed personally very strongly that the real antidote to war and the real key to reconciliation is the European integration. I tell you a little anecdote from my personal life. My grandmother, I still remember that very clearly, that had lived through the Second World War, obviously. She still was very anxious whenever she heard any German tourist speak in the streets of Rome. And it's only through the integration process of the European Union that we have become one Europe. And let me challenge the title here. I would like to rather focus on integration more than enlargement, because especially when we talk about the Balkans, I believe it's completely inappropriate to think about an enlargement. It's actually including one part of Europe that is already within our borders geographically and physically, not politically yet. This is why I think it's about reunification of Europe as much as it is when it comes to the eastern part of Europe. I believe that we will have the opportunity to discuss more about both the costs of non-integration and the opportunities and benefits of integration in the Balkans with our friends from the region in a moment. But first I would like to pass the floor immediately to Mr. Commissioner, my good friend. We're working together in different roles when I was High Representative. We will have basically, I think, 2 rounds, one now more dedicated to you, and then the other one more in conversation with the other colleagues and friends. So please, Olivér, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Federica. Thank you, Rector Mogherini. Well, it's a bit of an oddity to talk about first the cost of non-integration. It's a very central Eastern European approach. First, we always talk about the negative before turning to the positive. Maybe this is something different, but it also highlights first the dangers. And I think if we look at the war that we are seeing around us, that directly affects us, like it or not, what we see is that vulnerabilities imminently lead to conflicts and challenges. And this is why, when you look at the Balkans in a similar way, we all know where the vulnerabilities are. We all know where the real challenges are. And when we took over the mandate, this commission, it was a very important part of our priorities to put enlargement or integration of the Western Balkans back as part of the top 5 political priorities of the European Union. Because the war that we see in Ukraine, we have seen already in the Balkans. And we still have the aftermath. And we still have the homework to do and the lessons learned, which is a full integration of the Western Balkans into the European Union. But as importantly as that, a full integration of the Western Balkans within. Because peace and stability is best created through prosperity and not the other way around. Because once people have something to lose, they will think in a much more sober way. And I think the lesson that we have learned from all the previous years with the Western Balkans is that we have to now accelerate what we do. Accelerate in the sense that we don't only talk about the process, the institutional, if you will, the Brussels gibberish, but we talk about the real integration, the integration on the ground, how the life of the people of the Western Balkans is going to change and improve so that it will become similar or the same as the life that we are living in Europe, in the rest of Europe. And this is why when we inherited a deadlock in the negotiations with North Macedonia and Albania, we also inherited a region where the social and economic gap between the European Union and the Balkans is one of the key challenges in front of the Balkans joining the European Union, not to mention the institutional reforms that needs to be done. So with all these 3 challenges, we had to start to work very quickly. First, we deblocked the enlargement process as such through the new methodology. Because the new methodology was not only created for the candidate countries to be able to move faster and closer to the European Union, but it was also created for our internal reasons. Because I think that we got lost some of the key priorities on the way. Key priorities, why is it important for Europe to have the Western Balkans fully integrated? And I think that through the war now we start to remember. We start to remember why. And this is why the second big endeavor of ours was to speed up the economic and social convergence as fast as we can. Because through that we can create stability in a much more credible way. So if we help the Western Balkans to move faster, to have growth and jobs locally, to keep the youth working for them, to have the latest technologies when it comes to digital or green energy, when it comes to energy security, we are providing security and stability for the entire region. And this is why we have been pushing very close and very hard for a common regional market, so that they also start to work with one another, because we still have the heritage of the wars of the Western Balkans. And of course, when in Sofia, there is still one issue that one cannot avoid discussing. And that is, when are we going to have the first intergovernmental conference? Of course, for those living in this bubble of Brussels and our procedures, this is a buzzword. But for those who are not that closely involved, I think the key is, when do we start to work on delivering membership? This is the big question when it comes to North Macedonia and Albania. And I cannot hide the fact that I'm extremely disappointed that we're still discussing this issue, because we thought that we have sorted it out 2 years ago. but now it's back on the table again. So, you know, if you have powers and you don't use it, it is also considered by others as a surrender of your powers and capabilities. So we need to trust ourselves, we need to trust our powers, and I think all member states should trust the transformative nature of the accession process. And this is the message I have been bringing to Sofia again. I was here 3 weeks ago, and I'm happy to come as frequent as necessary to get this thing off the ground and get it done in June this year. Because the war shows us that we have no time to lose. Not only time, but we have no interest to lose any more time on this. And finally, on the topic, the non-integration, I think that the COVID and the economic crisis has shown what non-integration can bring. You have seen that we have included the Western Balkans in as many initiatives that were reserved previously from member states when it came to the COVID crisis. We were very quickly deploying our financial support, be it bringing healthcare equipment, be it saving SMEs, being helping to keep the public finances stable in very challenging and never seen crises before. And we have seen how fast the Western Balkans have profited from this. If they were not there, they wouldn't be the first partners to receive vaccines from Europe. If they were in Europe, they would have received it even earlier. If they were not participating in our integration, at least remotely, then they would have had trucks and goods stopped and supply chains broken off completely. But this was not the case because they were integrated. And I can go on with other examples. It only shows that it is not just a political project. This is an everyday project.
Thank you. Let me, if I may, let me get 2 or 3 lessons from what you said, reflecting on the mistakes that had been done in the past, in a way that we can try to avoid making mistakes today, because I think that this is the key point. Not so much reflecting on the past, or rather using the reflection of the past to avoid making mistakes today. First, as you mentioned, I couldn't be more on your side on this, completing the integration of the European continent is first and foremost in the interest of every single EU member state. So it's a national agenda too. Second, use the power you have. And this is true for the European institutions, the Commission, the Council, the member states, and obviously also the partner countries and the candidate countries, and those that are not candidate yet. Third, the integration, the complete integration of the European continent is indeed a peace project. And I think that in the Balkans, as well as in Ukraine, this is now self-evident, while it was not so much self-evident in the decades that we have in our recent history. It was more about democracy, rule of law, economic development and standards, which is also part of the project. But I think that here we're going back to the roots of when the European Union started, reconciliation as the key element of living together, sharing interests, as you mentioned. And last but not least, and here maybe I would invite our friends to join us, the credibility of the process. Use the power you have means that, I've always been convinced about this, there is no space for anybody to seriously compete with the European Union geostrategically in the region if the European Union is consistent. And I know that since, I would say not since I left office, but since the year before I left office, May, June 2019, the credibility of the European Union in the region has probably been shaken a bit. And I think that since then, at least now as an observer, I've seen frustration growing in the region, and I think that frustration is dangerous in this region more than anywhere else. So maybe this can be a useful forum, and sorry, I forgot to thank the organizer for having taken this initiative, because I think it is particularly important to have this, especially in Sofia, let me say. I think it is maybe a good opportunity today to understand what will be or what could be the costs or the risks or the dangers of lack of consistency or lack of movement, and on the other side, what could be the scenario should the process of integration in the region proceed as it should. So let me ask our colleagues and friends, ministers and vice ministers from the region to join us on stage. And if you agree, I would probably ask them first to give their reactions so that you have the concluding words. Would that be
Thank you.
A good option? So please join us on stage.